Pinnacle Systems is evolving into a company that requires a verified professional foundation from everyone in its technical leadership pipeline. The new Pinnacle needed people whose credentials could be held up clearly and without qualification.
Daniel, your position is being eliminated as part of the restructuring, and your final day will be the following Friday. Thank you.
On a cold Thursday morning in March 2019, a man named Daniel Marsh walked into the East Austin Community Assistance Center on Cesar Chavez Street, sat down at a plain wooden table in the waiting area, and signed a document that his lawyers had driven across the city to bring him. He had been inside that building before. He had filled out forms at those same tables before. He had sat in those chairs and waited for his number to be called, and carried home paper bags of government food assistance before. He had done all of those things as a 17-year-old boy who spoke broken English and owned almost nothing and understood with the specific clarity of someone who has no cushion between himself and reality, that in America, as everywhere else, the distance between who you are and who the world decides you are can feel impossibly wide. But on this particular Thursday morning in March 2019, Daniel Marsh was not filling out assistance forms. He was signing the final acquisition documents for ClearPath Communications, the company he had built from a second-hand laptop on a folding table in a one-bedroom apartment, in a deal valued at $8.3 billion. He had asked his lawyers to bring the papers here specifically. His lawyers had thought he was joking. He was not joking. Before this story ends, you are going to hear something that will stop you completely. Not slow you down. Not make you pause. Stop you. Something that will make you think about every person you have ever dismissed, every assumption you have ever made about what someone is worth based on how they appear, every door that has ever been closed in your face or in the face of someone you love. Because Daniel Marsh's story is not the story of a lucky man. It is not the story of a man who was in the right place at the right time, or who knew the right people, or who had advantages that simply compounded into a fortunate outcome. It is the story of what happens when a system designed to keep certain people invisible encounters a person who absolutely refuses to stay invisible. And it is the story of what that person chooses to do when the system finally has to look him in the eye. And I promise you, what Daniel Marsh chose to do is not what you are expecting. And before we go any further, we would love to know in the comments where you are watching from. We read every single one, and it means the world to us to see how far this community reaches. Now let us go back to the beginning. Because to understand what Daniel Marsh signed in that community center on that cold Thursday morning in March 2019, you have to go back 25 years to a small apartment in Bucharest, Romania, where a 17-year-old boy was deciding whether the risk of leaving everything he knew was greater than the certainty of staying. There are three questions at the center of this story. The first is this: how does a 17-year-old Romanian immigrant who arrives in Austin, Texas, speaking almost no English, cleaning office buildings at night, while his widowed mother sews garments from their apartment, how does that boy build a business communication company worth $8.3 billion in less than a decade? The second question is this: what exactly happened inside the offices of Pinnacle Systems on a gray November morning in 2008 when Raymond Cole, the newly appointed head of workforce strategy, looked across a conference table at Daniel Marsh and said something that Daniel would write in a notebook that same evening and carry with him for the next 11 years? And the third question, the one that makes people go quiet when they hear it, is this: what did Daniel Marsh do when he finally had the power to respond? Because the answer is 3 sentences long, and each one is more devastating than the last. These 3 questions are going to guide everything you are about to hear. And the answers will arrive the way important answers always arrive, slowly and in layers, and sometimes when you are least prepared for them. Because Daniel Marsh's story is not a simple story about poverty and success. It is not a story about a man who got even with someone who wronged him. It is something quieter and more complicated and ultimately more moving than either of those things. It is a story about what it costs to build something real when the world has decided you are not the kind of person who builds things. about what it does to a human being to be told repeatedly and in different rooms by different people that they do not have what it takes, and about the specific and particular strength required to hear all of that and keep building anyway. Stay with me, because the ending of this story will stay with you long after this video ends. Daniel Marsh was born in 1977 in Bucharest, Romania, the only child of a construction worker named Gheorghe and a seamstress named Elena. The Romania of Daniel's childhood was a country emerging painfully and unevenly from decades of communist rule, a country where the old structures of authority and exclusion were crumbling but had not yet been replaced by anything stable or fair. His father Gheorghe died of a work-related injury when Daniel was 14, leaving Elena to raise Daniel alone on a seamstress's income in a two-room apartment on the eastern edge of Bucharest. Daniel remembered his father as a man who worked with his hands and believed absolutely in the dignity of work regardless of what the work was, and who told Daniel from the time he was very small that the only thing that could never be taken from you was what you knew how to do. Daniel carried that instruction with him like a compass for the rest of his life. In 1994, when Daniel was 17, Elena made a decision that took everything she had accumulated since her husband's death and most of what she was afraid of. She had a distant cousin in Austin, Texas, who had written to her twice about opportunities for people willing to work. Elena saved for 2 years. She sold what could be sold. She packed 2 bags. She bought 2 one-way plane tickets. And she took her 17-year-old son to a country where neither of them spoke the language, where they had almost no money and almost no connections, and where the distance between who they were and who they needed to become felt on certain days like the distance between the apartment on Cesar Chavez Street, where they settled, and the glass office buildings of downtown Austin that Daniel could see from his bedroom window every evening before he went to work. Those buildings were close enough to see on a clear day. They felt like another country entirely. Elena Marsh found work immediately doing what she had always done. She sewed. She altered. She repaired. She took in garments from a dry cleaning business 3 blocks from their apartment and worked from their kitchen table from early morning until late at night, earning piece rates that were modest but consistent. Daniel found work cleaning offices. A commercial cleaning company operating the night shift in several downtown Austin office buildings hired him within a week of their arrival. He worked from 10 at night until 5 in the morning 5 nights a week, moving through the silent offices of lawyers and accountants and technology companies with a mop and a vacuum and a cart of cleaning supplies, learning English from the documents left on desks and the memos printed and forgotten on copy machines, and the trade publications left in break room magazine racks. He was learning the language of American business from its floors upward, and he was paying very close attention. By the time Daniel was 19, he had saved enough to enroll in night classes at Austin Community College. He took every technology course the college offered, and several mathematics courses, and one accounting course that he found unexpectedly useful. He was not the strongest student in his classes in the conventional sense. His English was still accented and sometimes imprecise. His formal educational background was inconsistent because of everything that had happened in Romania. But he had a quality that his instructors noticed. He did not give up on a problem. He would stay with something that was not working, a concept that would not clarify, a piece of code that would not run, with a patience that his classmates found baffling. His cleaning company supervisor had noticed the same quality in a different context. Daniel Marsh did not leave a floor until it was clean. He simply did not move on until the thing in front of him was done correctly. In 2000, Daniel applied for a junior position in the technical infrastructure department at Pinnacle Systems, a fast-growing Austin technology company hiring aggressively across all departments. His application almost did not make it through initial screening because of gaps in his formal education. A hiring coordinator named Susan Briggs looked at his application a second time because she noticed something in his supplementary materials, a series of self-directed technical projects he had completed and documented carefully over 3 years that deserved a closer look. She passed it to the department head. He agreed. Daniel Marsh was hired as a junior infrastructure technician at Pinnacle Systems in April 2000. It was the first time in his life that he had walked into a glass office building through the front door in daylight. He did not let himself think about that too much. He had work to do. For 8 years, Daniel built a career at Pinnacle Systems with the same quality of attention he had brought to everything before it. He was not promoted quickly. He was not visible in the way the company's more politically skilled employees were visible. He did not play golf with managers or position himself strategically for advancement. He built things. He fixed things. He solved problems that other people had given up on. He developed a reputation among engineers who worked alongside him as the person you called when something critical was broken and you needed it working before morning. That reputation had no formal title attached to it. It did not appear on any organizational chart. But it was real, and it was valuable, and it was, as it turned out, not enough to protect him when Raymond Cole arrived at Pinnacle Systems in the fall of 2008 with a restructuring mandate and a very particular vision of what a complete professional looked like. Raymond Cole came to Pinnacle Systems from a management consulting firm in Dallas with a brief to modernize the company's workforce structure and eliminate what the new leadership called legacy inefficiencies. He was 36 years old, Texas-born, University of Texas MBA, and possessed of an absolute confidence in his own judgment about people that he had never had serious cause to question. He had a method for evaluating employees that he described in meetings as reading the whole person. The method involved reviewing formal credentials, assessing communication style, and evaluating what Cole called professional presentation. This was a category he defined loosely but applied consistently in ways that tended to disadvantage people who had arrived at their competence through routes other than the ones Raymond Cole personally recognized. Daniel Marsh had arrived at his competence through cleaning products and library cards and midnight problem solving. Raymond Cole's method was not designed to see any of that. Daniel Marsh came to Raymond Cole's attention in October 2008 during a systematic review of the infrastructure department. Cole's assessment noted the absence of a 4-year university degree, the non-traditional educational background, and what he described in his notes as an unconventional professional trajectory. He scheduled a meeting with Daniel for the second week of November. Daniel prepared for that meeting the way he prepared for everything, carefully and thoroughly. He brought documentation of every significant project he had contributed to during his 8 years at Pinnacle Systems. He brought performance reviews. He brought emails from senior engineers acknowledging his contributions to critical system recoveries. He organized everything into a folder and arrived at the conference room 7 minutes early and sat down and waited. Raymond Cole arrived 4 minutes late, sat down across from Daniel, looked at the folder on the table between them, and did not open it. What happened in that conference room on a gray November morning in 2008 was witnessed by a Pinnacle Systems HR coordinator named Melissa Tran, who was present to take notes, and who described the meeting in detail years later after the ClearPath acquisition had made it a story worth telling. Raymond Cole told Daniel Marsh that Pinnacle Systems was evolving into a company that required what he called a verified professional foundation from everyone in its technical leadership pipeline. He said the new Pinnacle needed people whose credentials could be held up clearly and without qualification. He looked at Daniel's folder once, briefly, and pushed it back across the table without opening it. He told Daniel his position was being eliminated as part of the restructuring and his final day would be the following Friday. And then he said the thing that Melissa Tran wrote in her notes and that Daniel wrote in his notebook that evening, and that stayed with a sharpness that does not dull over time. Raymond Cole told Daniel Marsh that Pinnacle Systems needed people who arrived already formed. Daniel Marsh, he said, did not have the kind of foundation the company could build on going forward. Daniel Marsh sat with that for a moment. Melissa Tran's notes record that there was a pause of approximately 45 seconds between Raymond Cole's final statement and Daniel's response. 45 seconds is a very long time to sit in silence in a corporate conference room. During those 45 seconds, Daniel Marsh looked at the folder he had prepared sitting untouched on the table between them. He looked at 8 years of documentation of work that had kept the company's systems running through 3 major crises and 2 significant growth periods. He looked at all of that evidence of foundation. Real foundation, built from cleaning supplies and library cards, an absolute refusal to leave things broken. And he understood that Raymond Cole could not see any of it. Not because the evidence was insufficient, because Raymond Cole was looking for a different kind of foundation entirely, one that came with a specific kind of paper attached to it. So Daniel said thank you. He picked up his folder. He shook Raymond Cole's hand. He walked out of the conference room. And that evening he opened a plain notebook to a fresh page and wrote down exactly what Raymond Cole had said word for word. He needed people who arrived already formed. Daniel Marsh did not have the kind of foundation Pinnacle could build on. He wrote it carefully and completely. Then he closed the notebook and put it in the drawer of his bedside table. He did not open it again for 11 years. The months after losing his position at Pinnacle Systems were the hardest Daniel had experienced since his first year in America. He was 31 years old. He had 8 years of deep technical experience and no university degree and a resume that showed exactly the kind of non-traditional trajectory that Raymond Cole had found insufficient. He applied for positions at other Austin technology companies. Some did not call back. Some called back and then did not follow through after the interview stage. He spent his evenings at his kitchen table with a laptop and a notepad working through lists of companies and contacts and possibilities. He walked past the East Austin Community Assistance Center on his way to the library. He recognized the feeling of that building the way you recognize a language you used to speak. He was not ashamed of that recognition. He was simply aware of it. And he was aware, with a clarity that sharpened with every unanswered application, that if he was going to build something in this industry, he was going to have to build it himself. Because the doors that opened from the outside were not going to open for him. So he was going to have to build his own door. In February 2009, Daniel reached out to Kevin Tate, a former Pinnacle Systems colleague who had left the company voluntarily 6 months before Daniel's dismissal after growing frustrated with the same cultural shift that Raymond Cole represented. Kevin was a systems architect with a business background and a personality that complemented Daniel's in the specific way the best partnerships tend to work, where each person's strengths address the other person's limitations without either person having to pretend to be something they are not. They met at a diner on South Congress Avenue on a Tuesday morning and talked for 5 hours. Kevin paid for the coffee. Daniel paid for the food. They split the check on the notepad between them the same way they would later split the equity in the company they decided that morning to build. The problem they decided to solve was one Daniel had observed from the floors of downtown Austin office buildings and from 8 years inside Pinnacle Systems. Businesses communicated badly, not because the technology was insufficient, but because the available technology was built around assumptions about data and privacy that made genuine secure communication either impossible or so technically complex that ordinary businesses could not implement it. Every product in the market was built for volume and advertising revenue. Nobody was building for businesses that genuinely needed their communications to be private. The law firms, the medical practices, the financial advisors, the manufacturing companies whose competitive advantage lived in their internal conversations. Daniel knew those businesses because he had cleaned their offices. He had read their memos on copy machines at 2 in the morning. He understood what they needed because he had spent years invisible inside the spaces where they worked. ClearPath was going to be built for them. They built ClearPath in Daniel's apartment on 2 second-hand laptops on a folding table that Kevin brought from his storage unit. Daniel handled the technical architecture. Kevin handled the business model and early customer conversations. They had no office, no staff, and an initial investment of $180,000 that Kevin had secured from a former business school colleague who trusted Kevin's judgment enough to write a check without a formal pitch deck. The deal closed on March 14, 2019. billion. Daniel Marsh's share represented the largest personal wealth event in Austin technology history at that time. His legal team had arranged for the signing ceremony to take place at Nexus Global's regional headquarters in a glass conference room, with catering and a photographer and all the formal trappings of a transaction of this significance. Daniel thanked them for the arrangements and asked them to change the location. He gave them an address on Cesar Chavez Street in East Austin. The address was the East Austin Community Assistance Center. He explained that he had been inside that building before under different circumstances and that he wanted to sign the papers there. They brought the documents. They brought the photographer. Daniel sat down at a plain wooden table in the waiting area and signed his name on an $8.3 billion acquisition while a fluorescent light flickered slightly above him and a woman across the room waited for her assistant's number to be called. He did not find this ironic. He found it correct. 22 days after the ClearPath acquisition closed, Daniel Marsh received a letter at his Austin office. It came through his assistant, forwarded from a return address in North Dallas. It was from Raymond Cole, who had left Pinnacle Systems in 2013 after the company's fortunes declined significantly following a series of failed product launches and a talent exodus that had begun with the same restructuring that had cost Daniel his position in 2008. Raymond Cole had spent the years since 2013 in a series of increasingly junior human resources consulting roles at smaller and smaller firms. The letter was 5 paragraphs long. The first 4 paragraphs described Raymond Cole's professional background and areas of expertise in workforce strategy and organizational development. The 5th paragraph asked whether ClearPath Communications, now a division of Nexus Global, might have any senior workforce strategy opportunities that Daniel could bring to the attention of the relevant team. Daniel Marsh read the letter once sitting at his desk. He set it down on the desk in front of him. He picked it up and read it a second time more slowly. Then he sat with it for a while, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with something more complicated and more human than either of those things. He was thinking about a conference room in November 2008. He was thinking about a folder of documentation sitting untouched on a glass table. He was thinking about 45 seconds of silence and a man who looked at 8 years of real work and saw only the absence of a particular piece of paper. And then Daniel Marsh opened his laptop and composed a reply. He did not ask his assistant to draft it. He did not run it through his legal team. He wrote it himself in approximately 4 minutes and sent it before he could reconsider the precision of it. The email was 3 sentences long. The first sentence acknowledged receipt of the letter and thanked Raymond Cole for reaching out. The second sentence wished him well in his search for new opportunities. The third sentence said, "I hope you find a role with an organization that values the kind of foundation you have built." The story of that email was shared publicly 3 years later by a member of Daniel's legal team who had been present in the office when Daniel composed and sent it. It circulated widely in technology and business circles where the ClearPath story was already well known. What made people stop when they heard it was not the reversal of fortune it represented. People understood that. What stopped them was the precision of the language. Raymond Cole had told Daniel Marsh in 2008 that he did not have the kind of foundation Pinnacle Systems could build on. 11 years later, Daniel Marsh wished him well in finding an organization that valued the kind of foundation Raymond Cole had built. The echo was exact. The restraint was complete. There was no anger in those 3 sentences. There was no gloating. There was just a very quiet and very precise reflection of a man's own words returned to him from a distance of 11 years and $8.3 billion. Raymond Cole never replied. Nobody who has heard the story has found that surprising. The ClearPath division of Nexus Global for 18 months after the acquisition. When Nexus Global began making changes to ClearPath's data architecture in late 2020 that Daniel believed compromised the privacy commitments the platform had been built on, he resigned his advisory role. He did not make a public statement. He did not give interviews about his reasons. He sent a brief note to the ClearPath team thanking them for everything they had built together and left. Kevin Tate had stepped back from the company a year earlier. Both men have since been involved in early-stage investment and philanthropic work in the Austin technology community, with a particular focus on programs that provide technical education and mentorship to first-generation immigrant young people who remind them of who they used to be. Pinnacle Systems was acquired in 2016 by a larger competitor for a price that represented a fraction of its peak valuation. The decline began with the restructuring of 2008 and accelerated through a pattern of talent departures that followed. Several engineers who had worked alongside Daniel during his years at the company have spoken publicly about the period after his dismissal. They described consistently and independently a company that began optimizing for the appearance of the right credentials over the substance of actual capability. They describe a period in which the people who genuinely understood the systems were gradually replaced by people who had the right kind of paper, but not always the right kind of knowledge. And they describe Daniel Marsh's departure, in hindsight, as the moment something important and very difficult to name began leaving the building along with him. Elena Marsh lived to see her son sign the ClearPath acquisition papers. She was 62 years old and in reasonable health, and Daniel had arranged for her to be present at the East Austin Community Assistance Center on that Thursday morning in March 2019. She sat 2 seats away from him at the plain wooden table and watched him sign. Afterwards, someone asked her how she felt, and she said in Romanian that she had always known he would do something. When they asked her what she meant by something, she said she was not sure exactly, but that she had known since he was very small that he was not a person who could be stopped permanently by anything. That the most anyone or anything could do to Daniel was slow him down temporarily. She had watched the stopping attempts happen over and over during her son's life, and she had watched him get up each time. By March 2019, she had stopped being surprised by the getting up. She had simply started expecting it. The lesson that most people take from Daniel Marsh's story is the obvious one: that credentials are not the same as capability. That the way someone arrived at what they know does not determine the value of what they know. That poverty is not evidence of limitation, and that dismissal is not the same as judgment. These are true lessons, and they are worth taking. But the deepest lesson in this story is not about credentials or poverty or dismissal. It is about the notebook. Daniel Marsh wrote Raymond Cole's words in a plain notebook in November 2008 and kept them in his bedside drawer for 11 years, not as a reminder of his humiliation, but as a reminder of his purpose. He was building something that would make those words untrue. Every morning he woke up and went to work on ClearPath. He was answering Raymond Cole. Not out loud, not with anger, with work. The $8.3 billion was not the answer. The answer was the 8 years of work that produced it. And the 3 sentences were not revenge. They were a receipt. Before you go, we want to hear from you. If you had been Daniel Marsh sitting across from Raymond Cole in that conference room in 2008, what would you have done? Would you have pushed back in the moment? Would you have let it go the way Daniel did? And when the tables finally turned 11 years later, would you have written that email? Or would you have stayed silent and let the $8.3 billion speak entirely for itself? Drop your answer in the comments below, because this community always shows up for conversations like this one, and we genuinely want to know what you think. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about someone in your own life who was told they did not have the right foundation, please hit that subscribe button right now. Because next week we are bringing you a story about a man worth $100 billion who sat alone at table 57 at his own son's wedding and said nothing. Not one word. You are not going to believe what he did next. Until then, keep building, and never let anyone else write your foundation.